And I'm not a techno person, so I hope I get these right too. And I'm not near as strong as Pat. I have my Kleenex in hand. This has been an emotional day, wow. Thank you so much for inviting me. Considering the numbers, there was only 627 donut dollies, thousands of nurses, and then of course thousands and thousands of you guys. It's a real honor to be included in this incredible day. I am learning so much. Michael Fellows, wherever he is, I was on fire bases all the time, and I just always thought they were just there. You know, they were just waiting for us. I didn't know you had to make them. Anyway, it really has been inspiring to listen to the stories and learn about a lot of the other things, especially before I got there, since I wasn't there until 70. So a question I get asked often is, why would a 21-year-old woman volunteer to go to Vietnam? I'm going to put that on my upbringing. I was raised by World War II B-17 pilot who at 23 years old did 35 missions. He married my mom first, then went off and luckily made it back because there's 7 of us and 32 grandkids and the rest of the story. But he was my North Star. He was righteous and good and a wonderful man, and of course, all about your country, and you trusted the government to do the right thing. The other part of that is I grew up in the 60s. I'm pretty sure most of you out there remember the 60s. And I also happened to be in college in the 60s. So not only was our country in the middle of this war and not understanding a lot of why, in a lot of cases, the protests were starting, especially on college campuses. I was very, very in love with a soccer player at St. Louis University, where I was going to college, and I was in the living room with him while him and all his teammates watched the balls drop to decide if they'd be drafted or not. I also had 4 brothers. So it was a real conflict for me. One side, my dad and his values. The other side, what my peers are saying. And I also had this thing about why are these men's lives expendable, but the women aren't. We don't have to be exposed to this. We can choose whatever we want. So it was a real confusing time for me. I decided how I was going to do that was to go over there myself and see for myself and make up my own mind. That's how naive I was. I think it's very ironic I'm placed between 2 Marines. One led into here, and then one's going to follow me. Because, first of all, by the time I got over there were no Marines. It was all mostly Army then. And so it was a Marine that got me to go to Vietnam. I knew that I could not go in the military. My wonderful, technical, supportive husband is here, and you can find him, and he will tell you I cannot take orders. So the military was out for me. That was no way going to work. So this Marine, a friend of my brother's, had just recently returned from Vietnam, and he said, you don't have to go in the military, you could join the Red Cross. Well, that's all I needed to hear. So the qualifications were pretty easy. You had to be 21, you had to be unmarried, and you had to have a college degree. So simple enough. Sign me up. Oh, wait, did you get my little... There we go. I want to explain the name Donut Dolly. I will tell you, being from the 70s and women's lib and everything else, I found it very offensive at first. Wait a minute, I'm going to go to war and you're not going to be calling me some Dolly. And then I heard the history of it. The Red Cross's mission has always been supporting the military, and especially during wars. And so in World War II, so we had, these were the grandmothers that we stood on their shoulders. they had what they called clubmobiles, where they could make coffee and donuts and go on flight lines. Could have served some to my dad. And also, they were also on the front line. This picture is especially impressive because this is 1 month after the D-Day and the Normandy beach. So they were right behind the troops, going either, wherever the troops were, they were going to go. And what the role was, and still was in Vietnam, comfort, compassion, and to remind the troops there's home. There is a home, and we're part of that. Well, maybe I skipped the map, but it won't matter at this point because I can go back. Wasn't there the map in Vietnam there? Maybe not. It doesn't matter. You've seen the map of Vietnam a lot. So understand map. You've heard a whole bunch about it. Those clubmobiles were not going to work in Vietnam. We couldn't just drive anywhere to see the troops and stuff. So there was also no defined front line where the women could follow along that had the troops in front of them. Basically, the troops were all over. So the military gave the Red Cross a mission. They said, you're going to have to create a mobile program that can go to any remote area that the troops are located because you've still got to boost their morale and give them that emotional support. How they trained us to do this was 2 weeks in Washington, D.C. I called it charm school. They basically just told us what rank was and how to obey our, the upper rank, the lower rank, behave ourselves, don't date married men, don't be seen drinking, don't be anywhere around guns, because the Red Cross is neutral. That was really, we were trained by a lot of older women that had never even been over there, but I'm really glad that very, very early film you saw showed the outfits that we wore. We really looked like ridiculous 1970s flight attendants. They rarely mentioned to us our transportation, how we would get around, and never brought up that we would be always around active combat zones. But they did stress over and over and over again. The Red Cross is neutral, so we are giving you nothing to defend yourself with, no helmet, no flak jacket, no nothing. Just the angels above and my mother's prayers. Okay, so now we can go to my favorite. These were our Ubers, as we called them. Well, we didn't call them. Ubers weren't even existed then. These are my favorite things, but we went a lot of different ways. We worked 6 days a week, 12-hour days. If you were somewhere that was there were actual roads, you could go on jeeps and trucks. But almost everywhere I was somewhere that I had to fly to. I was Marical up in Chulai. That was my very first assignment. Beautiful beach, thinking this is really going to be nice. Little did I know. Then they moved us around a lot. They said it was because it was just good and it would keep us fresh with our ideas. It was really because they didn't want us to fall in love with anybody, and they certainly didn't want us dating any married men. So they figured if they kept moving us, none of that would happen. There was women that figured out a way. Anyway, then I went down to Benoit and was with First Cav, and we were on the Army side, and if we really wanted a good drink, then we went over to the Air Force side because they had blenders. The Army never had a blender. You got very resourceful, just like all you guys did. My last assignment was way up, above way, at Camp Eagle, and 101st was up there. So these were, because of where I was and where I was stationed, I had to fly almost every day. And so we called them slicks, And only recently, when I got to talk to all the cool Vietnam Pilot Association guys, they explained to me, I just thought they called them slicks because they look slick, and I just thought they were cool. And they go, well, no, they used to have a whole lot of guns on them, and these were slicks that they didn't have a lot of guns. We did have door gunners on either side of us, but we would sit in the middle there. And so our day began at about 6 in the morning, because that's when they had to go on wherever they were going to go, and then they would drop us at the fire bases. It was incredibly cold. Fortunately, they did give us a field jacket, not the Red Cross, the guys provided them. It was all windy, so you'd think your hair was really cute, but by the time you got to the fire base, especially when you have curly hair, so we put our little hoods up and stuff. But they were such fun rides. And of course, they would always try to impress us, so they'd even be more fun. They were truly, truly our lifeline. If we would not have had them, we could not have gotten to the troops that we were supposed to visit, because they could get us there and they could get us access to wherever the troops happened to be. You've seen, this is I give this talk to people that they have no idea what a fire base is. So it's so nice that you all already got educated on what it is. But this was our biggest destination most often. And then in the field too, if there wasn't mountainous area, then we would go to places that, LZ zones and things they set up out in the field too. And then you've probably figured out by now, our artillery would be stationed up there. There'd be signal corps people up there. And any of the grunts, sorry if I use the slang, but that's just the way I talk, but the grunts that were in the field, if they got their chance to get back up and get hot food and stuff like that, they'd be at the fire base, and then the next platoons and company would go out. So we would land, and we'd always have to check with the CO up there and say, who's on the fire base today, or who's on the landing zone, whatever, how many different people, because our goal was always to see at least 150 men a day. Not at all at the same time. We would do any groups from 20 to about 50 up. We'd also try to get a read of, had the grunts just come in? Are they tired? Maybe we shouldn't wake them up. They'll be cranky. All those kind of things, so that we could figure out exactly how to plan the day so we could get the goal of at least that. And if there wasn't it wasn't a bigger fire base, we would go to 2 different landing zones or fire bases in the same day. I want to bring out the color of our uniforms. Wasn't that a great target? Another poor planning on the Red Cross. Early donut dollies, like early 60s, they got to wear fatigues. Now, we had to wear these lovely little things. But somebody did say to me once, I think it was Dale House, somebody said, well, once I saw one of you guys, because I could see something blue way in the distance. So that was definitely us. So what did we do? I mean, we weren't Bob Hope. We didn't have a bunch of singing, dancing people behind us. So we had to entertain and help with this morale just with what we had. Now, this particular one, and I know a lot of the people were talking about how they're still friends with people. This woman here, her name's Dorner Carmichael from Georgia. She was one of my best partners, and we are still dear, dear, dear friends all these 50-some years later. This one was paper airplanes. Now, think that's dull? I'm telling you. And I know it sounds sexist, but men are so competitive. They would do anything just to go against the officers or the artillery, go against the infantry. You come up with anything like that, and the competition was on. It was basically whatever would work with that group. No, I went too fast. Oh, okay, I'm going a lot over here. It was trying to be flexible at all the time. I wanted to show the one about the... Oh. Nope, okay. Never mind, it's not in that way either. There was one in there that every night we would create these different programs and come up with these different ideas. And we would have acetate boards, and we had one that I had a picture of. I don't know what happened to it, but it was on fall. It was just simple questions about trees and leaves and anything simple that they could, just anything to get their minds off of the war. You have to remember that guys here the average age was 19, and we'd have high school dropouts all the way up to grad students and stuff. So it had to be adaptable. The questions had to fit all ages and stuff and be interesting enough for them. And we'd have to design these every night after a 12-hour day. Trivia worked really well. The picture I wanted to show you is we made the mistake of they had to run up and put a leaf if they knew the answer, and they had to put the leaf on the board before the other team did, and we used nails for them to put the leaf on. I'm sorry, Pat and the other nurses, we probably sent some to you because they would just gouge their hand trying to get up there because that competition was so important. I just love this picture. This is Margot. She's from North Carolina. We're still good friends. Because one of the biggest things we were supposed to do was make them laugh, make them think about something else. And I'll tell you, most of the time they made us laugh more than we made them laugh. I was very fortunate, of course, to have dated this guy that was on the soccer team, so I knew all about that banter between men. And then I had 4 brothers. So I could kind of understand male humor a little bit. And the best thing to do, of course, was have them make fun of each other, and then they'd get us laughing and things. Nothing they could say or do shocked me because of the brothers and the experience in college and stuff. And sometimes I would provide the being laughed at. I don't have a picture of it, I should, but only one time I got to go on a Navy ship. It was the USS Oklahoma. It was based off of Chulai. And the admiral, I assume, whoever was the top dude on the ship, found out that there were American women, and he sent his fancy helicopter, and we got to see a color besides OD green, because the Navy didn't wear OD green. It was very exciting. He flew us out to the ship, and of course, they had not been on land for 6 months, so they hadn't certainly seen an American woman. I don't know about other women, but they hadn't seen American women in 6 months. And I had it in my head, and I don't have a lot of boundaries. Whatever comes to my brain, I say it. And so there was like 200 of them just hanging off, staring as we're getting off this helicopter like we were Anne Margaret or somebody. And we're in our dorky little blue uniforms. And we get, they announced if anybody wants to visit with us to go down to the galley or, so we get down there, and there they are, about 200 guys, that's it. And we have these programs that we carry in these canvas packs, and we look in it, and the woman that had grabbed it, we always had to travel in pairs of 2, she grabbed the wrong program, and all it was pieces of different games. It didn't make any sense at all. There was no logic to it, and here's all these guys. So as usual, I just don't think about it, and I yell out, there's total silence. There's not a word that they're saying. And I said, you guys probably don't, thinking that they haven't been on land, so they know about a donut dolly. I say, you guys probably don't know what we are. And one guy way in the back yells, it ain't been that long. So I really appreciate you guys making us laugh too. It made our day happier and better. Okay. Now, the early movie again, when we looked like they showed us all in our fancy Class A or whatever they called them, the long skirts, these ridiculous hats, and actually heels, black heels. That's what they sent us over in. Well, let me tell you how fast. We all figured out how to get tennis shoes, even if we had to have them sent at home. We definitely got rid of the skirts because you're getting in and out of a helicopter every day, and that's not part of the program, kind of getting in a skirt and climbing up. So back, I don't know if you guys remember culottes. They call them something else different now, but it's basically skirt that is like pants. So you can keep my little Catholic girl dignity in place. This was just Twister. This was just simple twister. They thought it was so fun, and especially when we get involved in stuff too. And one of the real advantages of going to fire bases and doing different things, we got to hear what a lot of the higher-up NCOs and certainly the officers didn't hear. And the best guys that I loved were the ones that when we'd come back to base and, you know, where it was a little bit safer, they'd say, okay, what does LZ Debbie need? What does LZ... And we'd say, well, they haven't had clean clothes in a whole long time. They haven't had hot meals in a long time. And you could always tell which ones really cared about their men because they would sit there and take notes. I had one favorite one up in Camp Eagle that this whole women's lib I had to give right out of my mind if I wanted to do anything for these guys because he would whistle for me. We lived in these old trailers up there, and he had some nice quarters down here, and he'd whistle, and that meant I was supposed to go down there because I was in charge of our unit then, and he'd have milk and cookies sitting out for me. A beer would have been more appreciated, but that's okay. And he would take notes the whole time of everything I said. We also had somebody trying to make rank at that point. I believe he was a colonel, I'm not sure. But anyway, he told us we couldn't visit anybody on the fire base because there hadn't been enough kills. And I found that very offensive, that we were there to, you know, help the men, not help him get a promotion. And so sometimes, because we were the American women, the only ones on the base, and there was nicer officers' quarters back on base, we'd go to these general, I don't know what you'd call them, you know, receptions or something. And I told the general there, I said, this guy wouldn't let us see him because it wasn't enough. You know, there weren't enough kills. And so the party was going on, it was almost over, and we were getting ready to leave, and the general called everybody's attention, and it was dead silence, and he addressed this colonel, and he said, I hear you wouldn't let the women come on your fire base today. And he was like, well, no, sir. And he said, that won't happen again, will it? And he said, no, sir. And so I probably should have got Article 15 for that, but since I was a civilian, they couldn't do that. And I know that at least I did what my part was, that I was going to see those men. Thank you. As we've said, a lot of the Red Cross mission, World War II and Vietnam and everything was remind them of home, give them that touch of home. So before we'd even begin with any group we were talking to, we'd say, I'm from Terre and I'm from Illinois, or I'm from, I didn't usually say Downers Grove because they didn't know what the heck that was. I'd say Chicago or whatever. Well, these guys just thought that was so cool that I was from Illinois, and so I love this picture. It's hanging in this special room that I have at home and stuff. This is what helped them, and I didn't realize it until I was in country for a couple months. There was a real disassociation for them. This is how they kept sane in an insane place. It was that they would always say, what's the word in the world? What do you know about the world? You got any papers from the world? And I always go, what do you mean? You're in the world. No, we're not. This isn't the world. This is Vietnam. It was the way that they kept their sanity. So to tell them that we were from Illinois, or Dorner would really turn on her southern, I'm from Georgia. She didn't talk that way, but she just did it just to be funny and stuff. But that reminded them that there was their place back in the world, and that's where we got defined as. We were the girl next door, we were their sisters, we were their girlfriend. I never ever, and I will agree with Pat here, felt so respected and so safe than even when surrounded by 200 guys and there was only 2 women. Even when we'd go to stand-downs where they'd get beers and steaks and everything else, and there'd be girls dancing that didn't have a whole lot of clothes on, they were still, my one daughter saw that picture and she goes, did you ever get scared? And I said, never. They respected us so much because they needed us to be mom and apple pie. They just did. And it would be funny because, of course, liquid courage, you know, they'd have a couple beers, and one would maybe by accident drop a F-bomb, and about 5 of them go, "Shut up, what are you doing? She's right there." Like I'd never heard it with 4 brothers in the house. It was not always fun and games. You adapted. If it was the time they needed to talk, you listened. They liked to tell any stories that they had. I think that they felt safe with us, that they could say what they wanted to say. So here we just ate lunch with them. This was actually a pretty good lunch. Usually we had those MRI things too. I remember the best thing, if one person had peaches and somebody else had pound cake, you tried to get together because, oh, that was so good. But then that's when they would mention things about a parent that was really sick at home, or that somebody divorced them while they were over there, and a guy saying, "I'm not going to re-up because I don't have anybody to go home to." One came to show me his new baby once and was so excited, and the other guys started laughing. I said, "Don't laugh, new babies always look like that." And they go, "No, we're laughing because he hasn't been home in a year." And you just have to "Oh, okay, well," and he goes, "Well, a baby's a baby." And I go, "You're right, a baby's a baby." He had to normalize a lot of things you never thought you'd normalize in your life. But the compliments and what kept us going and making us get up the next day and create a new program, no matter how tired and sad we were, was when you'd hear things like one of the guys saying, "You got our lieutenant to play that game." I go, "Oh yeah, we can get the officers to play." And they said, "No, our lieutenant hasn't talked in 4 days because he lost too many men. And this is the first time we've heard him talk." I thought, well, if Twister takes that, that's a good bonus for it. The other thing is they never forewarned us if we were going to be coming into something that would be a little tough to do. It was basically every day, the way I wrote it, you're going to be called on. You're going to be a comic, a counselor, or provide comfort. And you would never know, and it could be all of them in the same hour. This is a recon unit. You can tell the difference so much from when the guys are playing the games and dressed and stuff versus getting ready and having all their gear up. I really had to get used to guns fast. My dad did not hunt. We did not have a gun in the house, everything else. There were guns everywhere. I don't know what the Red Cross was talking about. But we didn't have one. We weren't allowed. And we could not go in any transportation that its only mission was to shoot. We couldn't go on Cobras. We couldn't go on any of the really, really fun stuff. We couldn't go on a tank. We would sit on the tank and let them take our pictures because they thought it was really cool. But obviously, we couldn't shoot it and things like that. So if you meet something like that, then that's when you just listen. You don't sit down and say, "Let's play bingo" or something. The other thing, a couple times, and not very often, we actually got to go in the field, right where the grunts were. And one of my very special memories, one of my hardest though too, was we got to serve them hot food on Christmas. And so they had a whole bunch of really hot food. We went right out into the bush where there was, there had to be at least 100 infantry. They all lined up, and then they were going to come through the line and get, hot food and stuff. Unfortunately, because 3 helicopters land and there's 100 guys lined up, the Viet Cong were not stupid. And there must have been some of them even from a village, but we took a little bit of a fire. Can hear it. The guys immediately run to their duty stations. I don't know what to do. I hid behind a cardboard box. Now, my kids just love that story. "Oh, that would have stopped the bullet, Mom." I go, "I'm sorry. The Red Cross didn't ever teach me what to do," and all of a sudden they're shooting at you. So the sad part about that trip is there was a guy that had a little tiny Christmas tree mailed from his mom, and he took shaving cream and put snow on it. And we could have access to the PX back on base so we could get pictures developed. So he said, take my picture, take my picture. So I stood with him, took his picture. And the next time we were on a fire base and his company happened to be in, it was at least a month or two later, I said, you know where he is? I want to show him the picture. And he had been killed. And they didn't know how to tell me. I put that picture up every Christmas. Okay, so how did this war, like it did all of you, change you? Well, here I am in college, running for Miss Billiken at St. Louis for homecoming queen, just as naive and ignorant as can be. And just like anybody else, Vietnam changed me. Within a year, this is what I look like. This is coming home from work after a 12-hour day on a fire base, hoping the chopper will remember to pick you up. What it did to my life, saw me how resourceful I could be, how I could use my talents to be creative and flexible. It taught me compassion, being calm, and courageous all at the same time. I have tremendous respect for men and women that put on the uniform, whether you signed up or whether you were drafted. I became confident that after that year, I could face anything that could come to me in life. And to end, isn't that a beautiful picture? That is a beach in Vietnam, and I'm pretty sure it was Loach. I'm not sure a slick could be quite that precise, but they used their skids to make that peace sign. I'm pretty sure, and a friend of mine took it, so it's real, it's not fake. I read in a book that somehow you get a thumbprint that gets put on your soul, and mine was seeing 19 and 20-year-old young men goofing around, some pilots groups we were with. They had this really silly dance they do to Creedence all the time, and something would happen and danger, or they'd get the signal or whatever, and their faces would transform just instantaneously, and they'd go from these little boys out to being grown men and warriors within a flash. They were determined, especially towards the end of that war, to protect each other. When it was all clear, which most of the time it was fairly soon, they would want to come right down back to the dance or the game or whatever. And after seeing that so often, thinking what that did to them, what that did inside of them to have to do that way more often than I ever saw, I will never, ever forget that. That transformation was amazing, and maybe can explain why sometimes it was hard to come back home to normalcy. All I can say is we have to find peace, because war is not the answer. Thank you.
That's great. And I left a copy of the war cradle for you. Wow. Wow, how do we top that? I'm sure many of our veterans have very fond memories of the Red Cross workers risking their lives to bring you a little bit of home.